Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, where we celebrate individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Marvin Cash is our guest on the Outdoor Adventure Series today. Marvin is a storyteller and connector. He helps fellow anglers gain a deeper understanding of the sport of fly fishing and the people in it, and he is the host of the Articulate Fly podcast. Now, I'm trying to figure out which is his side hustle and which is his day job, because when he's not fishing, he is a practicing attorney, a businessman, and an entrepreneur. Marvin, it is a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and it's always fun to be on the other side of the mic and do a little bit less work.
I like that. I really haven't been on a lot of other peers' podcasts, and for some reason, I just don't want to hear my voice. But especially on the delivering end. And what's your perspective? Because you, as a fly fisherman, there's a lot of fly fishing radio shows, podcasts. What's it like to be a guest?
You know, this is actually, it's kind of funny. This is my second appearance. No, that's not true. It's my third appearance, but it's my second and third. I had one last night, so I don't do a lot of them.
Okay.
Some of that is actually by design, not trying to hide myself, but just in the sense of, like, one of the great things about your podcast is you're really well prepared.
Yeah.
Right. So you ask for questions and you understand, like, and I think you and I have talked about this, about valuing people's time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I try to be kind of selective. And so, if someone says, hey, let's go be on a podcast, and you say, well, what do you want to talk about? And they're like, well, we'll just talk about whatever. We'll just hit record. I generally kind of shy away from those. So.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, as for our listeners, we're going to have about a 7 to 10 minute segment, which is going to include the video of Marvin and I. We were both joking that we have fantastic faces for radio, so we're going to have a wonderful video time, but then we'll have the rest of it is going to be a good old audio. And so I'm curious. Let's talk about your background briefly. Practicing an attorney, businessman, entrepreneur. It's kind of like the chicken in the egg. Which came first? Had you always been, outdoor enthusiast, fly fishing or angling of any sort? Did you grow up with that, and that was a part of your getaway from the business world? Or did that come in later in life?
No, actually, well, kind of yes and no.
Okay.
So I started out, I had a grandfather who took me fishing when I was a kid, and, fished a fair amount, didn't really hunt as a kid. And then, what happens, right? You go to school, you get responsible, you don't do the things that you love. And so I didn't really fly fish as a kid, but probably, I guess, in my early 30s, when we started our family, I wanted to have something to be able to kind of compete with Y soccer, to spend time with my boys, and I was working too much. And that was kind of when I got into fly fishing, also started buying shotguns and shooting sporting clays and things like that. And so that was really me coming back to the sport, and I found it very healing, right? It was one of those things, like, the great thing that I like about fishing is it's a problem you can't always solve. And so it really soaks up a lot of that extra kind of mental and emotional energy. And so it really recharged me. And so I really kind of have gone kind of both feet into the deep end of the swimming pool on that stuff. And then, from a professional perspective, had worked in large organizations. I think we mentioned before we started recording, one of your companies, Lee Hecht Harrison, actually helped me when I got blown up in the Great Recession in 2008. And so kind of working through that, I've been lucky to be a lawyer, to kind of work on the business side of what I've done as a lawyer. And I'm always kind of interested in things. And so I probably, I guess, late 2015 had a really serious automobile accident and said, you know what, time to stop waiting until you're retired to do these things. And so I kind of reorganized my life and started my own law firm so that I could have a lot more control over that part of it. And that was when, and I probably for 10 years before that wanted to do podcasting, started the podcast. And that's been Yes, where podcast is in its fifth years, I probably left the last large law firm probably 6 years ago.
Okay. Wow. I a statement you made probably about a minute or so ago, getting into fly fishing and a problem you can't always solve. For some reason, that just jumped out at me. Can we go back and kind of unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm academically oriented, right? So
Okay.
really, really lucky. Went to Duke undergrad, majored in economics, was a bit of a math geek as well. Went to law school and did finance, and um, most problems, if you spend time on them and put some effort into it, you can kind of break them down and solve them, and that makes them uh, become less interesting over time, right? Because kind of like from a career fulfillment perspective, if you can always figure it out, do you really want to do that same problem for the next 40 years?
I
Right.
understand that mentality. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's really, why fishing appeals to me. It's kind of why I have these kind of entrepreneurial things that I do because I like challenges and I like working on puzzles. And that's one of the reasons why my law firm is called the Gordian Knot.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of what I'm selling to people. What people come to me for is for that really hard stuff. And that's what I enjoy doing, and I enjoy doing that with people in the industry too.
Okay. Okay. So, as far as fly fishing is concerned, and I realized this as I was reading the intro, I kind of gave it away about, well, I guess the articulate fly kind of gives it away a little bit that that this is fly fishing, angling, and this sport has this mystique to it. Some people are big game hunters, big game fishermen. I don't know if you know Anitra Hamper. I mean, she goes out around the world and fishes major league fish. I mean, these are the ancient ones, the arapaima, the wolffish, humongous catfish. But then there's the fly fishing in some of the most beautiful rivers and waterways around the world, and can do it everywhere. But there's a mystique about it. And I'm really curious, how does that differ in your mind, say, from going out in the lake and, doing some bass fishing, or maybe up in the Northwest for a muskie and fish like that? I mean, what is it about fly fishing that is so unique? And it kind of, to me, it kind of tugs at your soul.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly, can be a romantic element to it. I mean, I think some of it is, um, it doesn't always have to be like this. So, for example, it can be more active and more involved in the sense of, like when I was a kid, I used to have a Zebco 33. I'd put a worm on a hook, I'd throw a bobber out, and I'd wait for the bobber to go down, right? And so your day was basically spent watching the bobber.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to gear fishing than that, but I don't really know. Because I'm lucky, I fish for multiple species on the fly, and it's all interesting. It's kind of weird. I mean, I love being outdoors, and I'm not really a fish counter. And so for me, there's so many great things, whether it's getting up before the sun comes up and like being out on the water when the world wakes up. I mean, there are all these great things to it. And I think it would be wrong to say that only fly fishermen experience that because I think hunters and other anglers do as well. But yeah, I don't know that I can really kind of, put my finger on it, but it's captured me and I keep sticking with it.
Okay. So I guess, and again, this is where I will share in the spirit of full disclosure. I do this a lot. I've never fished in my life. Perhaps I might have caught a bluegill off a dock and probably the pole and the bobber many years ago. I was a lot younger back then. But I'm curious though, as far when we talk about fly fishing, what type of fish are you angling for?
You literally now can really, if it swims, you can catch it. You can catch it on a fly. The um, Sorry about that. So for example, smallmouth fishing, very popular. Um, bass, trout. I mean, that's what people generally think about. But, at this point, there are literally people, and I've interviewed them on the podcast, that are fishing for sailfish and marlin on the fly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, and I've been lucky enough to go fish for muskie on the fly, catch, 40 plus inch muskie on the fly. So it's really, I think what's happened is, the technology has gotten better. And I think the biggest thing that's probably attributed to that is that the rods and the lines are better, and so that you can fish for these fish without being so fatigued. But I mean, honestly, um, if it swims, you can catch it. I literally just had Jeff Currier on the podcast. Jeff's a few years older than me. He's fished on 6 continents and has caught 440 species of fish on the fly.
Oh, wow. That's
So,
pretty amazing. Is there a favorite when it comes to the fish? And also, and this is the question, you can keep it a secret if you want. Is there a favorite locale that is like, I mean, it was like the experience that you will never forget?
yeah, I mean, so for me, I'm very trouty, right?
Okay.
If I won the lottery, I would fish for everything, and I would fish gear, and that would be what I would do. But given the number of days I can fish a year, I predominantly fish for trout.
Okay.
Not really a secret. My favorite place to fish so far for trout's the Firehole River in Yellowstone National Park.
Okay.
And I normally go out there in the fall. So like late September, early October, it's usually snowing. It's a phenomenal place to fish because it's otherworldly. So that's the river that's downstream from Old Faithful.
Okay.
And so you're out there and the buffalo herd is congregating for the wintertime. It's snowing. You can smell the sulfur from all of these thermal features, and there's scalding water rolling down the hill into the water. The riverbed is actually not rocky or sandy. It's actually volcanic rock. And you just fish that, and you literally can walk, just around the bend, and, it looks the same way that it did when Lewis and Clark was there.
Oh, well, now I am a opportunistic individual by nature, Marvin. And I'm thinking this fall time frame when you head out to Yellowstone, if a certain podcasting colleague named Howard Fox were to plan to stop by, even for a day or two, to experience that, how would you feel about that?
No, I always like taking people and showing them places. It's a super special place. And, I've been lucky to fish a lot from drift boats in Montana and Wyoming and Colorado. But quite honestly, fishing in the park on foot has been great. And I think I think the coolest thing about it is you can literally feel the world going to sleep, right? You can literally like feel the gears of the world going to sleep for the winter. It's a really phenomenal experience. And, you cap that off and you leave the park about an hour before it gets dark, and you get to see the herds of elk. Because what's happening basically, right, as it gets cold, that cold air is pushing all the wildlife down off the mountaintops.
Right.
So it's really pretty phenomenal. And then, you just go have a nice meal, maybe drink a bourbon or two, and do it again the next day.
I love that. I'm going to be chatting with you about that because this time of the year in Nevada, I mean, we're 115 outside today. We don't go anywhere unless it's perhaps up in the mountains. And I'm seeing pictures on Instagram and TikTok, Facebook, and I'm thinking, I'm sitting in an office working, coaching, podcasting. It's, it's an oven outside. I need some place just to experience something new. And like, would you just describe that? I'm thinking, I could do that. I could do that. I love that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the great thing too is, I generally try not to go out west between Memorial Day and Labor Day because it's just so crowded.
right.
So you can get a little bit of solitude.
Very nice. Very nice. So how did the business take shape for you, not only in crafting your podcast, which I do want to talk more about that, but also the business around the articulate fly and helping individuals either start a business or to essentially, to end of the day, whether it's a full-time job or a side hustle, but to make it something that you're going to want to build and expand upon. I mean, that's a tall order because a lot of us entrepreneurs don't necessarily know how to build a business. We have an idea. It's not easy.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's a perpetual challenge, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes the best outcome is you're just not as dumb as you were yesterday. So But I would say, the front end facing part of the podcast is pretty traditional, right? So, large revenue source on the front end is really paid advertising,
Mhm.
right? And so, there's a storytelling component. What I try to do with the Articulate Fly podcast is to dig a little bit deeper and to really kind of drill into the why. I mean, you're a coach, so you'll know this. I didn't invent that. That's from Simon Sinek, right? So, to help people tell that story. And so, my fundamental value proposition to advertisers is I'm very, very deep down the funnel, right? So I may not have the largest audience, but I have a very committed audience. And so that's probably the predominant thing. You and I were talking before we started recording. I really wrestle with merchandise,
Mhm.
if for no other reason than I really don't want to deal with sales tax.
Yeah.
uh, I can do the fulfillment thing, but then, some offshoots of that. So, another thing that I do that doesn't happen regularly and maybe something that comes into the mix is particularly during COVID, I was helping people do on demand premium instruction.
Mhm.
And so, if I took my webcam and tilted it 90 degrees over towards the wall, you'd see basically something that looked like the set for making Star Wars, green screens, cameras, and we did that. The backside of it, and really kind of to back up a little bit, I was really lucky when I started the podcast because I'd spent a lot of time doing not-for-profit work in the space.
Mhm.
So I kind of had a network of people that I knew just from what I had done in the past, I was able to build on. But, what people don't see from the podcast is I do a lot of work consulting with manufacturers, guides, we'll call them influencers, retail shops, just helping them to be better. And that's really me bringing my business and my legal background to help these people because, a lot of things happen. So, like, if you're young in the fly fishing industry and you start a family, you need more money, right? So,
Mhm.
if you're going to stay on the water, we've got to find more ways for you to make money. If you're on the other side of the mountain, and you're in your 50s and you want to knock 50 or 60 days a year off your God calendar, you got to replace that income. So, how do we do that? Right. And so that's kind of the other side of it. And so those are the things that you just keep building on. But I would say, a lot of this with podcasting, you're not going to get rich unless you're Joe Rogan. And so
Not that
you
I
just try,
want to be Joe Rogan, but
yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's an interesting thing. And so there's some of it is a lot of it's like a tech element, right? So
Mhm.
you're literally just showing up every day, doing the work and being authentic and following the path and trying to figure out how to stay in the game. Right. So it's a challenging thing. I mean, I struggle with it. I think about it a lot. I think one of the great things I've done that I've kind of grown doing the podcast is I have a tendency to polish the apple.
Mhm.
And I think in over 5 years, we've put out over 700 pieces of content. So it's going out the door. Like it's not going to go out if it's not right, but we're not polishing apples. So
That's pretty impressive. And what has been the challenge for you with producing the podcast? What's been that aspect?
I think it's just basically staying with your vision,
Mhm.
right? So, and part of that is, you can have a vision, but if you're wrong, you might change, you need to change your vision, right? So you're perpetually, in your mind's eye, you have what you want to create, but then you also are trying to objectively collect feedback to see, is it right? Is it big enough? How do you need to change? And I think that's the hardest thing. I mean, so, gosh, we're in our 5th year. So, I mean, I've thought about that a lot, right? And, COVID was a little bit of an opportunity. COVID has changed. I would say we're seeing a little bit of a pullback in the industry from an advertising perspective right now. So, people that had money don't have money, right? And it'll be interesting. We'll start having those conversations, into the 3rd quarter. Um, but yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge. Cause mine's different, not necessarily different in a better way, just different.
Mhm.
And, just trying to be able to get up every day and kind of make that happen.
Sure. How do you ensure that the content you're producing stays fresh? Because you, unlike me, have niched down a lot. I mean, it's around the topic of fly fishing. It's the individual, the location, the equipment. I'm sure there's other topics that are pertinent to that niche. But how do you ensure that what you're producing, who you have on, and as a part of this conversation with you, that it stays fresh?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and it's interesting, right? Because we do fishing reports and they're timely, but there's also an annual arc to those. So if you listen to all of them 5 years later, you'll kind of learn about the fishing season. But I
Mhm.
think, really what I do is I never do like, oh, I have a book. Well, let's come on and talk about the book.
Mhm.
And so every time I do an interview, I have a Google Doc of questions and I send those out ahead of time because I have I don't prejudge how I want to color the arc in, but I generally have a story that I want to tell. And I intentionally create that content to be evergreen,
Mhm.
right? So for example, I anchor every single interview that I ever do into asking people to share their earliest fishing memory,
Okay.
right? And we walk through that. And so, and if we talk about a book, so for example, if I have someone on who's got a new book and we have an hour interview, we may only talk about the book for 10 minutes. And some of the other stuff that I like to do, some of my favorite interviews are what I kind of call the journey interviews. And so I was lucky enough to have Steve Ramirez, the author, on. And I mean, we talked for almost 2 hours, and it's really just about, being in middle age, having more to give, knowing that you don't have an infinite amount of time left, and how do you do impactful work, right? And that's not a fishing story, that's just a people story, right? And, if you're lucky, you can find those people and have those conversations and kinda share those moments.
It's funny as you were beginning this response. I was taking some notes, and I actually wrote down. I swear to God, Steve Ramirez, and then below Steve, Chris Milgate.
Mhm,
And for our listeners, Steve and Chris are both authors and very accomplished authors. Uh, and Chris is a documentarian, and I'm going to have her on the podcast next week for her newest adventure, which is with the grizzly bear. But
mhm.
uh, what I love about what you just shared is this, it's not just the topic, the love of this particular activity, but there are stories behind it. And, Marvin, you shared as well when about your beginnings and, how you got into the fishing, and you mentioned your grandfather would take you out. And that's for me, it's here in the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, so it's a very consistent theme, and the folks that are very enthusiastic about the work they're doing, their hobby, their adventure, their business building with it, a lot of that came from the grandfather, the father. I had one guest, his aunts were like the hippie aunts would take him out and go camping, in the back of probably the Volkswagen, bus, something like that, and I love that's how you started, with, your love of fishing, and I'm curious too, is that the whole stories, I mean, they evolve, and as even as an attorney, the attorneys listen, you ask great questions, and stories just come out, and I think that's the best part about what we do is we get to help others share their story as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's the interesting thing, and I mean, it's kind of almost like it's kind of funny because I periodically will rewatch, River Runs Through It, and my boys just roll their eyes. And they're like, "Not that fly fishing movie." I was like, "Well, it's really not a fly fishing movie. It's a brother family movie, right? That happens to use fly fishing as a metaphor." But yeah, I think the journey conversations are super interesting. I mean, not that there's not value in doing kind of more how-to technical stuff. But I think it's way more interesting to hear how people, got to the intersection that they're at that moment that we get to talk to each other.
Mm. How has this love of, the business and the love of angling and fly fishing, podcasting, how is that translated now into your own family, the nieces, the nephews, the cousins, the kids? How does that translated for you today?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think, my kids kind of think it's interesting and neat. It's very much a part of our routine. I generally try to record when there are other family commitments, so we don't interfere with that. I think, I think they find it interesting when they go to like fly fishing shows with me. There are all these people that aren't physically in our world in Charlotte that I know well and talk to and converse with. And they enjoy being outdoors. I would say they're not, my boys are not as eaten up with fishing as I am.
Mhm.
There are a lot more distractions now than there were when I was a kid.
Right.
But I would say temperamentally, it's really funny. So I've got one son who is very reticent to go, but then every time he goes, he has a great time. And then I have another son that's very gung ho about it. So it's an interesting thing, but it's it's something that I've done particularly with the not for profit work. I mean, for pretty much as long as those kids can remember. And I would say probably the bigger thing is, I always try to tell them to find something that they care about and to commit their time and their treasure to it, whether it's fly fishing or not. And, that's kind of one of the things that I kind of do kind of from a family perspective because I believe it. And another reason that I made some of those changes that I talked about earlier in the interview is because I didn't think I could be a good father if I wasn't modeling the behavior that I was telling my kids to exhibit. Right. So that's maybe a convoluted answer, but that's probably the best I can come up with right now.
No, I appreciate it. And I do have to ask, how do they, and usually you see this with much younger kids, but how do they speak about their dad podcasting? Because not a lot of people understand it yet. I mean, I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm a podcaster. And they're like, they have no idea how to respond to that.
Yeah, I think they think it's neat. I think probably the biggest cringe that my oldest son has is so I have um, when I do fishing reports, we basically to generate engagement for people that ask questions, I send them stickers. And so I have a very common refrain in my fishing reports, which is like, and if we use your question, I'll send you some articulate fly swag. And my 20-year-old son gives me a lot of grief about using the word swag. But yeah, I mean, I think they think it's kind of cool. And it is certainly different. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of what we do. And they'll just say, how was your interview? Who'd you talk to? My youngest son, probably more so than my oldest son, knows a lot of the people that I have on the podcast because he's been to more shows with me.
Mhm.
And so he thinks it's fun to stick his head in my office when I'm recording and say, hey, Bob, how's it going? Stuff like
Mhm.
that. So,
Very cool. Very cool. How has your approach to the quality and production changed or evolved since you first began?
yeah, gosh. So that's pretty funny. So when I started, I was recording with a Zoom H4. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
was running a splice out of the back of my iMac, and I was panning one of the channels all the way over so that I could get separate audio channels. I've grown up since then. I use a Rode mixing board and actually have a Rodecaster Pro 2 now. I would say, ironically, I still use GarageBand just because I think Logic is too heavy a tool,
Mhm.
and since I like to polish things, gosh, I would say I work harder to try to go as straight to tape as possible. I mean, this, you can spend a lot of time editing audio.
Mhm.
But probably the greatest tool that I use is a tool called Ophonic,
Okay.
which has saved me a ton of time. And what it basically does, and it's been evolving, it will, if I take multi-track, if I edit multi-track and put that into the hopper, it's a cloud service. It will take out the hiss. It will isolate the speech. It will automatically duck the intro and the outro. And you can even EQ the voices if you want to actually do that on my end, but it actually mixes it down to the perfect volume and posts it to Libsyn for me. That's probably the greatest time saver I have. Other things I do, I'm kind of a closet nerd.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of automation and like keystroke automation stuff for filling repetitive content. I try to batch a lot of that social media stuff. So Monday is a big analytic day and kind of loading all the follow up from last week's interviews.
Okay.
That's probably it. I mean, ironically, I have a very simple recording setup. I don't use Zoom because I interview so many guides on the river and so many people in the Rockies where the internet's really not very good that I
Right.
literally patch my iPhone in to my mixing board through Bluetooth.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, I periodically, maybe like once a year, maybe sit down and try to figure out if there's something I can do to save a lot of time.
Okay.
Um,
I will share my big aha recently is and I'm curious as an attorney how you feel about this artificial intelligence. So we have a service that once I edit my episode, I uploaded it to the file to an AI tool, which gives me back like 10 different headline ideas. It gives me show notes, introduction. Here's Marvin Cash. This is who he is. This is what we talked about. Here's the questions. And then I can pick and choose what I decide to use. And that for me has been a huge time saver. And I can also see the bumps in the viewership, the downloads.
Interesting. Is that Headliner, or are you using something kind of baked into your server service?
We're using a tool called Cast Magic.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So for our listeners, when we have the show notes at the end, I'll say, we use Podpage. That's our website. And that's what allows me to not only share the episode, photos, show notes, but I can also link back to the services that we use. We use Podpage for the website, Descript for the editing, and then Cast Magic for the AI. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of our big tools.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've taken a little bit of um a dive into AI. So I use Headliner to pull out my audiograms.
Yes, we used to use that.
And then I'm a huge fan of Canva for
Oh, yes.
images.
Yeah.
And I think the AI, when you basically do one image and then the drill, right? You got square, then you've got rectangular for Facebook, and then you've got kind of the super skinny for YouTube. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I would say I've started using Ophonic will do the show notes for me, give me an HTML file, which
Oh,
I've now
nice.
started linking. But yeah, I haven't I've resisted the urge just because I've been busy to really kind of play around with the AI stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't I think um it doesn't bother me. I like the fact that it gives it to you and then you can kind of tinker with it however you want it to be.
Yeah. Well,
Um
that was big, a big decision, a differentiator, because I just, I didn't want to take something. So, well, it's just our episode. It's not like it's pulling from anything else in the
yeah,
universe, which I'm okay with that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be
So,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, even in this industry, we're all as podcasters, we're always looking for the next best thing that can help us improve the quality and of not only of the episode itself, the technical aspects of it, but also improve what we produce. Where do you see yourself going in the world of podcasting? If you could look out a year or 2 years, where do you see yourself going?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I like the short form format. I literally was kind of backing into that as a way to do more content without killing myself,
Mhm.
right? That's a nice experiment. I would see you probably see more video podcasting from me. I mean, I've
Mhm.
got the equipment. I've debated about creating some different shows with different formats. So not just a host guest show, but possibly some other kind of content ideas. Part of it is, to your point, it's super nichey, right? So do you pull back out and you do more general outdoors? I love technology. Ironically, I've gotten to know a lot of technology people in fly fishing. And so we talk about doing almost to your point, almost not necessarily to talk about AI per se, but to talk about how to use technology as a tool and what's responsible software development and, how you should think about AI in the future, right? Because there's a lot of energy around that right now. So, I think I'll always be in it. I'm always kind of playing around. the coaching part of you will make you happy to hear that I've been running lots of job timers, just seeing how long things take so that I can decide if it's really worth the time.
Right.
But I enjoy, I don't know, I just enjoyed the storytelling part. And I think the great thing is, I mean, this, right? It's a lot of work, whether you
Right.
have AI or not. And, I always tell people it's not hard, but to show up at the same time every week for years is a commitment. And so to be able to help people that can benefit from that type of resource, to be able to participate as a guest on an interview, and have that piece of evergreen content is something I think I'll always do. Right.
Yeah. I love the fact that, like we're doing today, we're having a conversation. We had spent some time a couple months ago having a conversation. We finally booked the time. Now I get to chat with you. And it's like having, I equate it to having a beverage with a friend you haven't seen in 15 years.
Hmm.
And I love being curious about the other individual, what motivates them to want to do the work. And I think for that reason, I can see also continuing to do it. And I love the fact that this particular modality, the podcast, we can do it anywhere in the world for that
Hmm.
matter. And that is very intriguing for me because, like Yellowstone, later on in the fall, I could see bringing my equipment out, and when we're sitting having the bourbon, the whiskey after a wonderful day of fishing, is just doing a short podcast. What was it like? And it could be audio and video, and
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And I do think, I think technology will make it easier for people to create content. I think the flip side of that is it'll also make it easy for people to create junk, right? Which makes the care of the craft, I think, all that more important, right? To be, not someone like you read those articles who have completely AI generated voices and they're putting out podcasts.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a phenomenal thing. And I think, we from, sitting literally by the fire in the cave as cavemen telling stories. I mean, it's embedded in who we are
Yep.
and how we connect with people. And I think that I think COVID has really driven home how important that connection is, even if you're connecting digitally in a meaningful way.
Oh, very much, very much. And I'm curious, in the number of episodes you've produced, have you ever run into anyone that you look familiar, or I heard an episode and wow, this brought back memories? Any kind of moment like that that is, uh, you know, come up for you? I kind of put you on the
Uh,
spot for that one.
yeah, I mean, I guess probably, I guess an example would be so, from not just from the podcasting, but as part of that, I've become pretty good friends with Blaine Chocolate. And, the funny thing is, Blaine and I are close enough in age that we would have been at high school at the same time if we'd gone to the same high school, but he literally grew up on the other side of the mountain for me.
Uh,
And so there's some of the conversations that we've had about what it was like growing up in Central Virginia,
mhm.
which was, if you like being outdoors, was a great place to be. You were, on the Appalachian Trail, access to, the James River, the Maury, all these great opportunities to hike and hunt and fish. I think that thing is great. I would say, too, back to what you've talked about, um, earlier, with like talking to like Steve Ramirez or, other people when, I guess what I would say people of similar vintage to me, right? So I'm in my early 50s. Um, we have those very similar stories about like it was your dad or your grandfather or a miserable scouting trip where you got wet and you were cold. Those things are, nice things to kind of run across. And then I would say too, back to just talking about the journeys, like I love that stuff. And so, not every interview can be like that, but maybe say 1 in 10 is like that. Um, so those are kind of those moments.
Very good. Very good. Yep. Any insight that you'd like to share with our listeners about the journey you've been on? I mean, you've been fishing all your life. You've been avid outdoor enthusiast. You had the business side of of the equation, and now you've got the angling, you've got the podcasting. But what would you share to someone who's looking to make a mark in their adventure and their, have a life that maybe has some balance between, paying the bills, but also getting out there and exploring, because you've done a lot of both.
Yeah, and I would say I probably wouldn't have gotten there without the Great Recession, right?
Okay.
I'd have a very, very different life. I think, part of it is, you really only get one shot. I think it really, behooves everyone to be really deliberate about how they spend their time. And you don't, when I say have a plan, like it's not about, at 11:57, this is what we're going to do. But, it's very, very easy to get trapped, right? And then you kind of look up and you've let a lot of water go under the bridge. And so I would say the big thing is if there's something that interests you, work on it and, try to figure out a way to make it work. And the interesting thing is, and I'm a big believer that you can't be truly successful unless you're really passionate about what you're doing. And so I always say, like Steve Jobs was successful because he was incredibly passionate, right? He was qualified, but he was passionate. And so if you read, memoirs and biographies, I think generally everyone that's been impactful, they weren't super successful and they hated it. I don't think I've read any of those books, right? And so I would just, tell people to spend a lot of time, um, trying to find out what really moves them and to try to spend more time doing that. And I think the more you do that, the easier it becomes. And I think, the universe is going to open up in front of you, right? I think that being authentic and being on the journey and sharing that with people and building trust is a very, very powerful thing to do.
Very good. Very good. Marvin, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah, well, we're kind of everywhere digitally. So, the hub is really the website. So that's thearticulatefly.com. And then, we're on social media. I would say I'm even on Mastodon. The places that I'm not on TikTok, and I'm not on Snapchat, but pretty much everywhere else. Those you can find us there, and love talking fishing. Email I like better just because I believe in one inbox. I don't like having to go 20 different places to find the messages.
Very good.
But email me, email chat contact boxes on the website or DM me on Instagram, probably the best ways.
Very good. Well, we'll provide, of course, the backlinks to the website and to your social sites, and that'll give folks a great way to learn more about you and your passions, and also to reach out so they can you know start a conversation, and whether as a learner or as someone who's has a story to tell. So
Yeah, absolutely.
before we head out, last question, any last thoughts, insights that you'd like to share with our audience? And just
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I can say is, if you're, if you are outdoors, you really owe it to yourself and to future generations to do something to be involved to help protect the resource, right? So whatever that is, whether it's local or international, I would say, money's always great. Time is even better. And, pick one. There are lots of great organizations out there. Find one that interests you and give them some time and some money.
amen to that. And I wholeheartedly agree. And that's been a big part of our show as well, as having folks who are really involved with those organizations. And you are definitely spot on when you share that insight. Marvin, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, and so glad we have crossed paths, and I look forward to crossing paths again in the future. Hopefully, not just virtual, but perhaps even in person, perhaps even along a river in out west. Who knows?
There you go. Well, I've enjoyed it. I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I'd love to take you out on your first fishing trip sometime.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Listen, stay in the line. We're going to do a real quick close, and you and I can have a final chat.
Sounds good.
Very good. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Marvin Cash. He is a storyteller, connector. He is the host of the Articulate Fly podcast. Really just a phenomenal storyteller, and the passion around angling and fly fishing, and I think too is just, his background as an attorney, a businessman, entrepreneur. I mean, all of these, this confluence, just bringing everything together into the world of outdoor adventure, and just really, I learned a lot today. I mean, it just if you are not aware of it, the whole outdoor space is huge. And millions upon millions of dollars are spent in this area, and especially around the topic of fly fishing. I mean, it just talk about a niche sport, and everybody who's anybody knows somebody who is out there fly fishing. So, if this is a topic perhaps you'd like to learn more about, then I definitely want to encourage you to reach out to Marvin and visit his website at thearticulatefly.com, or on his social channels, Facebook, Instagram. I think we'll have to get the link to Mastodon. He'll provide that for us. Um, I kind of agree with him on TikTok and Snapchat, but that's a whole other story. But listen, we really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Now, as for us, you can find us on our website, the Outdoor Adventure Series .com website. We are also on LinkedIn and Facebook on our Outdoor Adventure Series pages. And we are also on all of the major podcast directories. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And we look forward to having you with us on another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.